Earthquakes are sudden, unpredictable movements of the Earth's crust that can result in widespread loss of life and extensive damage to buildings and infrastructure. Certain parts of the planet are more vulnerable to these catastrophic events, and the people that live in these regions have taken differing approaches to minimising the effects of these extreme episodes. The Earth's surface is made up of a number of interconnecting tectonic plates. Stresses from deep within the planet cause these plates to buckle or to slide past each other. The more the pressure builds along one of these plate boundaries, the more catastrophic will be the sudden release of tension when it finally comes. Japan is located on a plate boundary, and tremors are common. A magnitude 6.8 quake that struck the northwestern prefecture of Niigata in 2004 killed 51 people and injured thousands. That was Japan's deadliest earthquake since 1995, when a magnitude 7.2 quake killed over 6,000 people and caused catastrophic damage in the city of Kobe. But residents of cities like Tokyo live in fear of huge quakes, like the Kanto earthquake of 1923 that killed at least 140,000 people. That quake was a magnitude of 8.3 on the Richter scale, and it is such a powerful quake that the Japanese fear most. The Richter scale is a logarithmic scale used to express the total amount of energy released by an earthquake. Although the scale has no upper limit, values are typically between 1 and 9, and each full digit increment represents a 32-fold increase in released energy. Japan's Meteorological Agency recently launched an earthquake early warning system. It is designed to provide enough warning of when a quake is about to strike to enable utilities to shut down their power plants and speeding trains to brake before the shaking begins. The system does not predict earthquakes, but its sprawling network of underground sensors estimate the intensity of the quake once the ground ruptures, and sounds an alarm before shaking starts by exploiting the lag time it takes for different seismic waves to travel to the surface. When an earthquake strikes, every second counts. The service will be available to railways, construction and power companies, and hospitals. The Emergency Quake Alert System raises the alarm as soon as it detects the first seismic waves of a big quake that precedes the shaking. A training drill shows how the control room operator conveys the quake alarm to the men on the building site, giving them enough time to find a safer location before the shaking and potential devastation begins. The Japan Meteorological Agency now only provides their early warning system to public and private facilities to reduce damage. In the future, the system will be improved to convey information of a coming quake to the general public. Japan regularly holds earthquake exercises in collaboration with meteorological agencies, fire departments and paramedics. These emergency drills are important in keeping rescue teams thoroughly prepared should a big quake strike. 3 decades ago, China's northeastern city of Tangshan in Hubei province saw the most devastating earthquake in the country's modern history. At least 242,000 residents were killed in the disaster, and millions of houses were reduced to rubble and ashes within seconds. Today, the International Search and Rescue Advisory Group is ready to swing into action when such tragedies happen. INSARAG is a global network of more than 80 countries and disaster response organisations under the United Nations umbrella. In 2006, more than 200 rescue teams from China and 17 INSARAG teams from other countries gathered in Shijiazhuang, the capital city of Hubei province, to hold a joint earthquake rescue drill. For decades, China has been building its expertise in earthquake rescue. The teams use sniffer dogs to locate trapped victims and employ hydraulic rams to lift heavy rubble. Volunteers playing the role of injured survivors were helped or carried from buildings so that they could be treated immediately or evacuated to the nearest hospital. During such exercises, a number of different agencies must cooperate smoothly. Also, foreign volunteers must understand the system in a country they could be called to at very short notice. The International Asia-Pacific Regional Earthquake Exercise was designed to test how 18 countries could work together to deal with a serious quake to minimise the loss of life. The San Andreas Fault. The lower section of this fracture region has not produced a major earthquake in more than 3 centuries, and stress within the adjoining plates continues to build, threatening major cities like Los Angeles. A new study from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography of California, which has analysed 20 years of data, suggests the fault could rupture at any time. Experts estimate that a quake on the southern San Andreas region of magnitude 7.6 or greater could kill thousands of people in the densely populated Greater Los Angeles area. Debbie Kilb, the science director of the Scripps Institution, says the Earth is constantly moving, and movement in the San Andreas Fault is just a matter of time. Using satellite radar and global positioning data, the Scripps Institution measures the movement of the southern San Andreas Fault and uses a supercomputer for simulating what might happen when the big one does come. The section last moved in 1690, producing an estimated 7.7 magnitude quake, but it caused little injury or damage because hardly anyone lived there at the time. Calculating those subtle motions allows scientists to figure out how much strain is building up. Predicting exactly when that might happen, however, is beyond the scientists' ability. Scientists are working with underground sensors along the fault lines. Many Californian residents remember the quake that struck in January 1994. That tremor, which registered 6.7 on the Richter scale, struck the centre of the San Fernando Valley, killing 72 people and injuring more than 9,000. Weeks after China's Sichuan earthquake, aftershocks were still being felt, and authorities were still struggling with its consequences. More than 140 teenagers whose parents were still missing after the tragedy were moved to a university campus in the provincial capital of Chengdu. For these teenagers, Borei Middle School was their new home. They all received food, clothing and shelter since being rescued after their school collapsed in Yangshu town, which was badly battered when the 7.9 quake rocked Sichuan on May 12, 2008. Though their material needs were being met, social workers warned that much more would need to be done to repair the deep psychological damage that they and other survivors had suffered in an earthquake whose death toll is estimated around 70,000. The students, all between the ages of 12 and 16, were led out of the quake-hit Yangshu town by their teachers, treading along rubble-strewn roads. Carpenters worked round the clock to assemble bunk beds for the teenagers, while university students removed half a dozen pool tables from the canteen to give the teenagers more space. Until a large hall on an upper floor was converted into a dormitory, each child was allotted the space of just one single mattress on the floor. Most students were actually eager for school to start, to take their mind off the earthquake and their missing parents. These quake orphans do not appear among the statistics of the killed or injured, but they remain casualties of the giant earthquake. It will be a long time before any semblance of normality returns to the lives of these young people, if it happens at all. Some were fixed on the 2 TV screens installed in their dormitory, which were still carrying news reports of the aftermath of the quake. Efforts were made to contact family living away from the quake zone who were willing to care for their orphaned relatives. One estimate says that less than a third of the residents of Yangshu survived, which means that most of these students' friends and relations were casualties of the Sichuan earthquake. In the interim, local government will care for the quake orphans with food, shelter and education, but they cannot replace the loving families taken from these children. The Vice Minister of Health suggested that the government would pick up the costs of care for the earthquake victims. In Pakistan, after the South Asian earthquake of 2005, a different group of people were dealing with the same type of problem. In Muzaffarabad, thousands of people displaced by the quake centred in Azad Kashmir were living under canvas, and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees had set up a number of tent schools so students could resume an education disrupted by the earthquake that claimed more than 80,000 victims. For some of these children, whose original homes are remote villages deep in the Himalayan valleys, it was their first taste of the classroom. There is no tally yet of the number of schools destroyed and children killed, but across the region, hardly a school or college was left standing. The quake inflicted a particularly cruel toll on children. It hit on a Saturday morning, which is a school day in Pakistan, and classes had just started. It did not take long for the system to become stressed. As refugees continued to flow into Muzaffarabad in search of shelter before the snows started, the population of the tent city swelled to 500,000, with an associated boost in the populations of the tent schools. The new schools were being run by volunteer teachers, many of whom were themselves displaced from schools that were now just piles of rubble. Although children are resilient, many were plagued by nightmares and memories of the disaster with the loss of close family members. Rescue workers say around half of the dead were children. The tent schools and the tent cities that were spread across Pakistan's north were still crowded 12 months after the earthquake. The government of Pakistan was struggling just to provide shelter for those who needed it. A major international effort slowly started to train 30,000 new teachers and rebuild 50 damaged schools. Across Muzaffarabad, 2,000 dangerous buildings had to be razed before rebuilding could commence. It will take a decade for infrastructure to recover, but the damage done to people is much harder to calculate. In an effort to help heal the mental trauma, United Nations Children's Agency UNICEF is teaching Kashmiri children to record their experiences using digital cameras. Young people were asked to become photojournalists and given the task of reporting the devastation and reconstruction through their photography. Groups of schoolchildren set out to show the world how the disastrous quake had affected their daily lives. Muzaffarabad is in transition, with most of the participants still living and going to school in improvised shelters. Professional photographers show the children how to get started with the digital cameras, and artists encourage them to express their feelings via the images. The pictures can also be used to assess how well the children's mental health has recovered. Known as the IC2 project, it also asked children to identify their community's most urgent needs. The young photographers asked for homes and schools to be rebuilt, roads paved, and for easier access to them into reconstruction plans. The IC2 project was built on the first IC initiative, organised shortly after the disaster. That project involved children living in camps for people displaced by the earthquake. This time, the focus was on children's lives as they returned from the temporary camps to their villages. Students took more than 30,000 pictures. Of these, 3,000 were shortlisted, and professional photographers selected a final group of 35 photos for the exhibition. The images were displayed in public exhibitions in Islamabad, Tokyo, Rome, and New York. Earthquakes are some of nature's most devastating events. On average, they claim around 8,700 lives each year. Over the last century, earthquakes are estimated to have cost over 1 million lives and caused incalculable damage to infrastructure. Modern engineering projects must take into account the effects of earthquakes. Bristol's Laboratory for Advanced Dynamics Engineering brings together a range of scientists and equipment for evaluating structures to be built in quake-prone areas. A clear understanding of the dynamics of all structures is essential in designing buildings to withstand earthquakes. At the University of the West of England, scientists are conducting research into materials used in base isolation techniques. This is an important means of reducing the impact of shaking on tall buildings. The better understanding scientists have of the effect of earthquakes on a variety of structures, the more likely they are to be able to develop new protection systems for reducing the impact of catastrophic quakes. In Japan, the Ichijo company is hoping its latest quake-proof methods will save lives in one of the world's most earthquake-prone nations. Instead of quake-proofing a whole home, the company is offering family safety shelters, which can be installed inside any house. In 1995, collapsing homes caused nearly 80% of the 6,433 deaths in the Kobe earthquake. Since then, the Japanese government has been trying to push all homeowners to strengthen their housing foundations and earthquake-proof them. But progress has been slow, with most people finding the cost of these home improvements prohibitive. But Ichijo's quake-proof room can be quickly installed in any house and costs less than a third of the typical home reinforcement. Made of wood, it can be assembled in just 2 days. Japan is one of the world's most earthquake-prone countries, with one tremor occurring at least every 5 minutes somewhere across the island nation. Tokyo is especially vulnerable, as it is located nearby 3 major seismic faults. The best room to create as the family shelter is usually considered to be the bedroom, where most people spend an average 8 hours each day. The quake-proof room has undergone a number of public and very spectacular tests and continues to come through with flying colours. The only problem with the strong room is that residents may not be in the room when a quake hits. And also from Japan, known for its robotic technology, come a range of semi-autonomous machines that can enter dangerous and unstable buildings in quake-damaged areas. Engineers and scientists at the Tokyo Institute of Technology have been working on a wide range of machines which will be useful after earthquakes or even in minefields. Other creations include a flat robot on which a person can sit and move in any direction, and a variety of prototypes designed to negotiate any kind of terrain. An operator can control a robot from a safe distance in a search through collapsed buildings, with some developmental machines designed to manipulate objects around them. Designers emphasise that much work remains to be done. A special robot to locate earthquake victims has also been created. The machine, which has a light and a camera attached to its tip, can crawl under piles of rubble in search of survivors. Because of its vulnerability to earthquakes and its world leadership in robotic technologies, Japanese laboratories and research institutions are devoting large amounts of time and money to developing rescue robots and remote sensing probes that can be used at disaster sites. Though these machines are all test pieces, some robotic technologies, such as sniffing and hearing devices, are already proving their worth in locating trapped survivors at quake sites. In 1997, 2 earthquakes struck the Italian city of Assisi. The second quake brought part of the roof of the 13th century Basilica of St. Francis crashing to the floor, where it broke into thousands of pieces. The clean-up operation was enormous. Workers sifted through the precious fragments, looking for pieces that could be salvaged. These pieces were marked and catalogued to be replaced later in what would become a huge restoration effort. Frescoes by famous painters, including Giotto and Cimabue, were reduced to pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. The fragments were taken from Assisi to a team of restoration experts in Rome, charged with solving the mystery of where the individual pieces belonged on the original frescoes. In the laboratory, workers sorted the fragments, analysed the colour quality, and tried to fit the pieces together. Piecing the frescoes back together is a painstaking process, but a computer program has helped the team to solve the puzzle digitally. The software package analyses each fragment from the original fresco, building up a database of the pieces. After a rendering period, the software reveals the right position for each piece. The program manipulates digital facsimiles of the fragments onto a life-size photograph of the fresco before it fell. After the computer has done its job, it is left to the research team to complete the massive jigsaw. The facade of the basilica has already been restored, and the exterior gives no hint that the earthquake ever took place. But inside, there is still work to be done to restore the vault of the building to its former glory. One section of the basilica had been completed and was due to be put back in place. Painted by the 13th century artist Cimabue, it was badly damaged in the quake, and even with the aid of a computer, the task of reconstructing the image has been difficult, and many portions remain missing. The restorers didn't repaint the lost portions, but using original colours, they redesigned the borders of the fresco, leaving the centre of the image a neutral colour with some fragments replaced. The replacement of the fragments of this painting signals that the restoration of the Assisi Basilica is nearing completion. The restorers aim to convey a sense of how the basilica looked before it was hit by the earthquake.